Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm so excited to be back here with David A. Fields, who's been on this show. I can't even count how many times before, on episode number 1 of this show, and on many of the most popular episodes. I'll include links to previous episodes with David in the show notes. Episode 170 and 172 are super favorites of fans, talking about how to make outbound calls and how to use a CRM system. David, welcome back. It's always great to speak with you.
Well, I'm so excited to be back. We haven't had a chance to chat in a little bit, so I'm just happy to get a chance to talk with you again.
Thank you. So previously, like I mentioned, we've done all sorts of topics with your advice on specific topics. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, let me just mention this. Everyone listening, you really, really definitely should go to davidafields.com and sign up for David's blog. You can get it as an email newsletter, which it's the first thing I read every Wednesday morning. And obviously, you should also get David's book, The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients. I've given out a couple hundred copies. People always say it's the best book they've read on how to generate consulting business. So we talked about a lot of topics before, David, but we've never actually talked in detail about your practice and about how you work with consultants and boutique firms. So I thought we'd do that today. People occasionally I'll get requests from consultants like, hey, I'm trying to grow my business. Like, do you know someone you'd recommend that could help me? And I always point them your way. And now I can also point them to this episode we're about to do. So give me the overview. What do you do?
Okay. So let me jump in, but let me ask a quick question, Will. Can we broaden this slightly? Just because I want to make sure that there's value for people listening beyond just, hearing about my business, which is fine. So let's make this about the listeners, maybe. Here's a thought. You tell me if this works or not works, which is kind of almost more generally, what are the benefits you can enjoy if you have the right partner acting as an advisor, as a guide, as a sounding board, a contributor, and what does it look like to actually work with someone like that? And we can use me as an example.
I love it. See, David is the first chapter of his book is right side up thinking. So he's trying to make this valuable for listeners. Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. But I do want to make sure that we talk about like what you do in particular and some of the kind of situations that you'll help advise consultants or boutique firms through. But I love your framing of it. So start wherever you think is the best place to start. Tell me a little bit about what you do.
All right. So obviously, my firm we're very narrow focused. We work with small consulting firms and period. That's all we work with. And we define small as anywhere from a solo shop that might be doing $150,000 in revenue a year, right? Up to around $100 million. We have a couple of clients that are larger, but the vast majority of our clients are below $10 million. And so we work only with that group and really do it with one idea in mind: help them create the business that they want, which is a little bit different from help them just grow. Though most folks want to grow their business. That's not always the case. But that is I think the benefit of working with someone is they can help you get the business you want. We work with, I'm gonna like quickly scan internally some of our clients. We work with a small firm, a guy who was a solo when we started with him. And he wrote to me yesterday, which is why he comes to mind. And when we started, he was right around the $300,000 mark, which is very legitimate for a solo business, right? For a solo player. And he sent me an email yesterday to let me know that in June they did 300,000. So he'll do 3 million this year. Now that's 10x growth. So that's pretty good. And did I create that for him? No, of course not. He created that. But we've been working together it was about 4 years to get that 10x. That wasn't overnight. I'm trying to think of other folks that I talked with yesterday or today or will be tomorrow. Another group, they were about 7 people, so not a solo, and maybe just over $1.5 million. There's a group up in Toronto. They're going to be around 7 million this year. So those are kind of growth stories. That's the kind of thing you can do, but it's not always about growth. There's a woman in the western part of the U.S. who already was doing well. McKinsey, Bain, Booz, that kind of, top tier, was legitimately doing $500,000, $600,000, wanted to grow. So we built her up to $1 million. And she's like, I do not like this. It is not fun. It's too much work. How do we create a business that's smaller, but more enjoyable? And so that's what we've been building for her. It depends a little bit what you want. That's what we try to build. I often tell folks that we are more interested, we meaning my company and me, I'm more interested in the person running the business than in the business. And so we want to build a practice that serves you as a person. That's what we're trying to do. And the challenges are kind of consistent, but that's where we focus. You were about to ask a question, Will.
Yeah. So following on that, when you start working with someone, do you have some kind of process to really dive into what is it that person wants in life and wants out of their business? Like, how do you structure that whole discussion?
Yeah. So and that's a good question, because you have to start there. Not only do you have to start with what they want. This is a very personal business, and having the right partner involved, because it's so personal, relieves some of the personal stress that comes with it. We have a process. We have a diagnostic that we run at the very beginning. It's called SPARK, which stands for something solo practice. I don't remember anymore. It's a good acronym, but I don't remember what it stands for. And it's a little diagnostic geared specifically to solo businesses. So folks run through that, and that spits out a really pretty radar chart. We have an onboarding process where we spend a pretty fair amount of time just talking about, what you want and where you are and what's going on and what the stressors are and, what's in the way. So that goes into the mix. And then, typically when we're working with folks, the most common way we work with folks, at about 6 weeks or 8 weeks into working together, we create what we call a top priorities plan. And it would say, okay, well, based on the work we've done and where you said you're trying to go and, our read of what's happening with you, here's the 2 things or 3 things or 4 things you need to focus on. And step by step, here's how to get you there. And it's relatively detailed. It's at the 200-foot level, if you will, right? I mean, it's not saying. Actually, it may be below that, because it will say every week we want you to do this, or every week you need to do this. But it doesn't have, for instance, the list of contacts in that plan, right? It's not quite to that level of granularity. And we work through that plan and adjust it and change things and keep the longer term in mind. But yeah, there's a whole process for understanding that and getting, to the place where we are partners. And I think that's where the real benefit comes in.
Okay. So
not when you just have an expert, but when you have a partner. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
So if there's 2 or 3 or 4 different things on this top priorities plan, give me the list of like the 10 to 15 types of things that might be on that plan. So the most common sort of priorities that you often see with people, is it, building a new website, or is it starting a content creation machine, or what sorts of things are we talking about?
Yeah. So a lot of it depends on the size of the business. Okay. So because a lot of your listeners are solo practitioners.
Yeah. Let's focus there.
We can focus on that, because with the work we do with boutiques, so folks that are, over $1.5 million and have employees, does look different. Okay. They're at a different stage in development. And so our work looks a little different.
Yeah. Speaking of stages, I'll interrupt here. Speaking of stages, I loved your recent blog post about the 10 stages of consulting firms and where the first stage is just, I'll do anything for pay, like any project, I'll do anything, I'm anybody. And then the 10th stage is exiting your business. So wherever you are on that sort of staircase, there's always kind of the next challenge, the next inflection point. So it would be interesting to hear kind of about the more boutiques, like what they're working on. But a lot of listeners are independent consultants listening to the show. So let's talk about some of them.
Yeah, so we can talk about that. And it's funny you bring up that particular article, by the way, Will. That article received more kind of direct response than almost any article I published in, I want to say, maybe 5 years.
Wow.
And you just, did you write stuff and occasionally something hits. That one really hit. We instantly received inquiries from many consulting firms saying, "Hey, we're stuck at stage 4, or can you help us?" I'm like, sure. So out of that particular article, it's maybe because it just clarified these different steps, did particularly well. So the boutique process does look different. There we have a 1.5-day long firm growth lab, which is really intense to understand what the owners want, what we're trying to build, and what the opportunities are. And it's a little different. For a solo, it's not quite as intense and not quite as expensive. The things that pop up if you are a solo practitioner, here's what tends to be common. What's common is, first of all, just getting a handle on impact. What is it you do consistently that is attractive to the market? So who is your market? Very precisely. What problem are you solving that is urgent, that is pervasive, that is expensive to leave unsolved? And how do you articulate that in a way that is quick, that's memorable, that's repeatable by others, which is critically important. Right? So all of that kind of impact work tends to be very, very common, especially for solos, because many solos are still somewhere just beyond that stage 1. Do anything for anyone who will pay.
Right, and listeners, I'd point you to the episode that David did on the fishing line, which is recent. We'll include that link in the show notes. And also, this is kind of chapters, I think, 1 and 2 of your book, right? Covering off what's your impact.
I think you probably know better than I do. So I just write it, Will. I don't remember the chapter numbers. But I think you're right. So that tends to be critically important. Also, very common for solos is putting together the various parts of a business development engine that will create more consistency, that will create a little bit more predictability and reliability in terms of gaining leads and then clients. And so that might be a visibility building campaign. It's rarely a website, but sometimes a website update is on there. More often, it will be around sort of longer term visibility building, whether it's sort of some kind of sort of content generation, or often identifying with and working with partners. So that type of activity tends to be very common.
What type of
for
partners?
solos? So partners, you're a partner, Will, of mine. A partner is, or a distribution channel, if you will, from a visibility building standpoint, is anyone who can give you exposure to people who you would not be able to reach otherwise. And so many solos, frankly, boutiques also think, well, they have to do all the work. You got to kind of like reach out and meet people and get introductions. And that is true. You do need to do that work, but not exclusively. And if you can use partners to expand your reach, then you should. And everybody can. And for some boutique firms, we actually, partners are the primary driver of business. There's a certain class of boutique consultancy where we actually use partners predominantly. We don't try to get direct business. We try to get business through partners because that's the more efficient and better way to do it.
Now, in the independent consulting world, there's clearly the variety of staffing firms. Umbrex is one of
Yes.
them. There's some very notable peers of ours that I have a lot of respect for, and so forth. Outside of staffing firms, what kind of partners are you referring to? Are you talking about like accountants and
Oh,
attorneys? Or are you talking about like, software
no, I'm
firms like
talking of,
UiPath
no,
or something?
no. No, so no, that's a good question. And interestingly, you are a partner for me. I would typically not view you, for the most part, as a partner for a solo consultant. You are you're staffing, and so you are a source of swing demand if someone needs that kind of work. And that's how I would view sort of your class. You personally will, I think because of how you run your business, you are a partner to many, many consultants. And I think that's really just testimony to you as an individual and what you were able to build. But staffing firms in general, kind of on the border of partner. On the other hand, as an example, the editor-in-chief of Consulting Magazine, for me, is a partner because he is a conduit to many, many prospects. And he's a source of visibility. If I do webinars for Consulting Magazine, or if I publish an article in Consulting Magazine, that goes to my target. So that's a good partner for me. In where I grew up in consulting, we partnered with headhunters, and I still find headhunters to be useful. But we did a lot of organization design work. And so there was a natural partnership with headhunters because they would bring us into an organization where maybe they just placed the new CEO. And they would say, look, you're going to have to do some rebuilding here. And we know a consulting firm that can help you rebuild your organization. We would rebuild the organization. In the course of rebuilding your organization, empty boxes occur. It's sort of just a natural byproduct. And that creates more work for the headhunter. That's a partnership.
For independent consultants, what sort of partnerships should listeners of the show be thinking about going after?
I think they should be thinking about, again, broadly speaking, anyone who has a tribe that contains prospects you can't get to already, which means it could be someone who runs a blog, who has a lot of readers, or a podcast that has a lot of listeners, an association director who has quite a number of members, another consulting firm that is adjacent to yours and has multiple clients that you don't have, or a whole contact list that you don't have. Those are all examples of potential partners.
Okay, great. So I got us off track. So you were talking about some of the you're talking about some of the priorities that would go on this plan. So you talked about visibility building, partners. What are some of the other common things? I mean, when independent consultants come to me asking for advice, it's mostly not about how to run their firm and how to do bookkeeping, or they'll have questions maybe about, how do I get health insurance, business insurance? How do I find a PowerPoint production firm or something like that? But that's not sort of most people, their biggest issue is the business development piece.
Yeah, there are three big challenges for solos. The three big challenges are, how do we win, or how do I win more business more consistently, right? Just straight out business development. And so there are just many, many pieces inside that. And those are almost always on the priority list, which is why often impact is right there, because that's the first step in winning business. After mindset. And so interestingly, there's often a mindset component that we have to address as a top priority.
Can you say more about that?
Sure. The only difference between two consultants that are, have kind of similar levels of expertise and background, but one is crushing it and bringing in, let's say as a solo, $600,000, and one is struggling to bring in 120. The only difference is between their ears. They both know plenty of people. They're both able to talk to people. So what is causing the difference? And the difference is how they're thinking. how they think about themselves, how they envision themselves, what they're willing to try, what risks they're willing to take, how they view sales, how they view reaching out to people, whether they think they're going to be a burden on someone and an interruption, or whether they view it as an opportunity to be of help, or to create a relationship. How they, like, all of that's mindset, and it underpins the rest of the business. And since it's, the only difference between these two consultants that I just described is what's between their ears, we have to work a lot on that.
And how do you do that? Is it role play exercises, or how would you?
Well, there are some specific exercises we have. It's funny. Well, we talk a lot about this internally. We spent, I want to say an hour and a half, 2 hours just yesterday, once again, talking about what's the difference between this consultant and that consultant who we're working with. One of whom we're on a very slow path to growth, and the other is, 5x the business. We spend a lot of time thinking about that, so that we can help people see it. In terms of mindset, first of all, we have a process that we use that we borrowed from, adapted from Byron Katie. And I love Byron Katie's works. I think she was brilliant, or is brilliant. And so we've adapted some of her mindset work because we deal with this all day. I mean, every day. We know the mindsets that are common, the challenging mindsets that are common among consultants. And so we can also offer some alternative ways of looking at things and some evidence and perspective. So that helps. It also helps that there's a principal in my firm who's trained in psychology and was a practicing clinician. We do not do therapy, but it's helpful to have that kind of resource that understands how to work with people at that level and how to help them on a mindset basis. So I use all of that. We use specific processes and exercises, and just having a person, that's good at this, talk with them. We do that all the time.
So, a question for you.
Will, there's someone.
Go ahead.
Well, there's someone in the Umbrex community, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, who's very successful, has done great, and has been a client for a little while. We have a lot of Umbrex folks, and they, called one day a few months back and said, David, I'm angry all the time. How do we, and it's coming out in the business. I don't want to be angry all the time. And we worked our way through that. Now, is this particular consultant a Zen master now and always at peace? I don't think so. but not angry all the time. And it's not affecting the business.
One example.
That's part of this.
Yeah. So one example of a mindset that comes to mind, that just came to mind to me while you were talking, was what I often kind of encounter. People don't articulate it to me, but I observe it, which is in a initial discussion with a client, sort of a get to know you meeting where the client is considering the person. I observe this mindset that consultants seem to think the way to convince this client to hire me is to explain to them how qualified I am and describe all these past experiences, where usually that's like super boring and clients actually don't care at all about your past experience, in my view. Like, once you're in the room, really, it's the mindset, a different mindset is the way I win business is by actually advancing the ball or helping to solve the problem, like in this discussion. Yeah. And if we can make progress in this discussion. So I often hear people, like, they'll talk and talk and talk about their past experience. Clients don't really care. They don't ask enough smart questions in that meeting, like in your book, to do a context discussion to really understand what the client's situation is, and then they don't get it, the project.
Yeah.
Would that be an example of a mindset shift that you would help on?
Absolutely. That mindset, below that is insecurity, right? Below that, what you just described is an unsureness of your own credibility, or that clients will believe it. Because you do need to be a credible provider of a solution. And the the concern is, the mindset is, people won't believe that I can actually deliver the value. And so we can address that mindset. So that is a fairly common mindset. And role play can help that. And again, just using some of these tools to address it, which ultimately ends up with, at some point you have to just say, am I willing to act based on a different mindset? Whether I believe it or not, first I can act that way. And so am I willing to give a shot at trying a different way of interacting with prospects, where I don't spend so much time showing them that I really do deserve to be brought in.
Yeah.
And instead I spend time helping them achieve their goal. Right. So that would be an example.
Okay.
And by the way, I think we went off track because I went off track. I was going to say what the common problems are. So
you did number one. You did number one, business development, and then I cut you off. So what's 2 and 3?
It's all good, as always. The number 2 challenge, or one of the top challenges for solos, is typically balancing working in the business, meaning like working on projects. Because you win business, now you're working it, with working on the business and business development. So I want a project, I'm full-time on the project. How am I supposed to do that and also develop clients and do all the hard work and of long-term business development, and also think about building the business? So creating that balance and streamlining becomes important. And the third priority, which is related to that, is, okay, how do I grow? How do I get more revenue? How do I manage more revenue without just working more hours, without working endless hours? And I would like some semblance of a personal life. And since that's often one of the key sort of challenges for a solo, we also do need to do work. Typically, there are some priorities around infrastructure. And even though a solo might not be saying, hey, how do I do accounting, which we're not going to spend time doing either, we are going to say, you need to have a dashboard in place that looks at cash flow and capacity and clients, just so you have a projection. You know what's going on. You don't waste any mental cycles figuring it out. It's right there. You do need to have a virtual assistant. And if you don't have a virtual assistant, let's help you get one in place, which is harder than it seems.
Yeah.
And here's what that person could do for you. All right. For a lot of solos, just getting a virtual assistant. Now, you can save yourself all sorts of money. You don't need to hire me or anyone else. Just do this. Get a virtual assistant is going to unlock countless hours. So, and Will, you and I were just talking about that literally, I think, before you hit record.
Yeah.
Each of us has added a little bit of, assistance of infrastructure, and it just unlocks tons of hours.
I'm a big believer in that. I started getting support probably too late myself, and I think everybody, even if you're not bringing in that much revenue yet, you get someone for 5 hours a week, right? Or 10 hours a week to start out with. Find something flexible. How do you recommend consultants find a virtual assistant? What are the places that you suggest people go? How do you do that?
Sure. You must have a podcast on that somewhere in your archive.
We do. I'll include a link to it. But I'm always, but you've helped people, like a lot of people do it. So
it's really hard. Actually, before I say where, I would almost put a kind of like a Surgeon General's warning on it. I equate finding an assistant to quitting smoking, where the experts say it takes something like 11 quit attempts to quit smoking. I think I remember that from my days working on smoking cessation. The finding an assistant takes multiple attempts. And so just go into it realizing you're going to try someone. Ideally, he or she works out, but they might not. And then you'll try someone else. You get smarter about what you need, about how you work, about what kind of personality is going to work for you, what requirements. Maybe you need the same time zone, maybe you don't. And so part of it is actually not as much where, it's just being mentally prepared for the idea that's going to take a few attempts.
Yeah.
And then last I looked, there are about 30 providers of virtual assistant that are, of some scale. There are common ones people use. Zirtual, I think, is one, and Time, etc. There are a few. There are sources out of overseas, so you can offshore it. The Philippines is quite common, and all of that said, the first place I would look is inside your own network.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You ask your sibling whether their kids, your nieces and nephews are looking for some work, or anything like that. That tends to work better. But I mean, it took us. We have a fairly robust infrastructure at this point, but for my first assistant, I think it took 4 tries, maybe 5 tries. Just to get the right person, and person who lasts more than 6 months.
You talked about one of the top 3 questions is consultants asking you, how do I grow? And what are some of the common pathways that you help people through? I mean, I think there's only 3, correct me, but it's either you're going to raise your rate, going to raise your utilization, or you're going to get, leverage, get additional people that you're getting a margin on, or I suppose you could say, well, we're going to sell some products or do something like that. But I mean, there's not that many different directions you can go. But talk me through sort of how you help consultants think through that challenge.
Well, I mean, it's interesting how you just framed it. Consulting itself is very simple, right? It's an extremely simple business. The core of consulting is a 2-part cycle. You draw a circle, and that circle is comprised of 2 arrows, chasing each other. One arrow is winning engagements, and the other is profitably creating value for clients. And that's consulting. That's all we do. We win engagements, we create value for clients. And we just need to spin that cycle, and you can make that cycle bigger, if you will, or spin faster with good infrastructure. So you're right. There's a leverage truth inside that, and how do we profitably create more value with less effort? So that tends to be leverage. And the other is is what I would call your revenue truth. And your revenue truth is, how do I make more dollars? How do I sell more dollars? And that in and of itself could be broken down into 3 pieces. So your revenue truth is the number of clients you have times the number of projects you win per client times the dollars per project. And the number of clients you have is that book you mentioned, The Guide to Winning Clients. The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients was designed to answer that question, how do I get more clients? So that's one path to more revenue and more growth, so just more clients. More projects per client is follow-on business. I don't have a sexy name for follow-on business. And I haven't written that book. That will be the last of the 3 that I on this subject that I write. And then the last piece, which is, okay, well then how do I get more dollars per project? That is Same Rain, Bigger Drops, which is my next book, which is overdue, and was actually, I think, the first presentation I did for you and your group, The Same Rain, Bigger Drops.
Yeah, that's right.
How do we take each win and make it bigger? And for most solos, we can do a little bit. All 3 of those are open. They're all opportunities, and we can guide you as a solo through each of them. The easiest wins, it depends where you are. If you are already winning business with some consistency, we can do a lot on bigger drops. I mentioned this consultant who emailed me yesterday, who we've 10x'd, right? From basically $300K a year to $3 million a year. A lot of the initial work on that, a lot of the early work was around fee structures, how he structured his fees, the actual fee levels. I wouldn't say rates so much, and the offerings. so that his average project kind of doubled with that first year. And that's a way to grow. And the project doubled in revenue without doubling in work. Now, we've also added, a lot of clients, and we've added infrastructure there. But, all of that is open for growth. The learning how to create some leverage as a solo is important. Bringing in swing capacity of some sort, or being able to use subcontractors, that can be important. That can be helpful. It's not always required, though. Especially if you want to stay, if you're really happy, call it sub $500,000 in today's terms, in US dollars, you can absolutely have a business that produces that with basically using no subs other than, maybe a little analytical support or something.
Yeah.
And that's, very legitimate, happy, positive income for probably most folks.
You talked about the challenge of working in the business versus on the business. And I certainly, have experienced that myself today as well as since I started. It's always challenging when you have, actual revenue kind of opportunities that you're working on versus the longer term stuff.
Yep.
How do you help your clients work through that? Is it carving out some time and religiously observing it, or scheduling it, or
that's part of it?
How do you, what's the answer? What's the secret sauce?
Well, so interestingly, I actually think this is one of the key benefits to having a partner that's outside the business. Having a partner who's not involved in delivery and who does not have an equity stake. Okay, it is truly transformative. I've always had a coach, a business coach or business advisor. I have one now. We're meeting all day tomorrow. And one of the benefits of that, and one of the roles we play, is we are the keeper of the long term, of the bigger picture. So if you're a client, Will, and we're working together regularly and we're talking on a regular basis, a lot of our work is very, very in the weeds and tactical. Okay, how do you win? You're working on Kellogg. How do we land Kellogg as a client? Okay, let's work on that. Okay, it's very near in and tactical. And, and what do you need to do? You're working on the project and you're just up to your ears in the project. Well, one of my roles is to keep an eye on what are we trying to do longer term. And literally behind the scenes, for every one of our clients, we have what we call a purple section, so named only because I happen to highlight that section in purple in our notes. That's our kind of internal protocol. And that section has, for each and every client, we have kind of the overall arcs, the longer term threads. Here's what we think is going to help you achieve what you want to get to over the long term. Like we need to work on getting rid of some of your small clients and boosting the larger clients. Maybe that's a longer term thread or something else, so that while you're focused on the everyday stuff, then we have a conversation. You're saying, oh, well, David, also, you know what? I got this inquiry from Bob's Barbershop. I can say, that sounds great, Will, but remember, one of our long-term objectives here is to raise the level of your client. And so my question to you right now is, do you think Bob's Barbershop is going to do that? Because I have some concerns. And we're not shy about voicing concerns. At least I'm not. And, so I can be the keeper a little bit of this work on the business thinking and in the longer term, and keep some level of focus there and say, okay, look, Will, you've got to get an article out. This was part of what we decided when we were talking about your visibility building strategy. So can you do 2 hours of writing this week? You say, yes. Okay, let's take a look at the calendar and let's get that scheduled. And then send to me the article. Just send me the draft.
Yeah.
And so, a little bit of that accountability mechanism. The accountability mechanism, frankly, isn't. I think it's helpful. It's important, but it's not the the core of the value. But it helps. A lot of work gets done the night before meetings with me or with, a principal on my team.
Tell me about that cadence of interacting with you or your team on just how you work with your clients. Is it
Sure.
some regular thing? Is it
Yep.
ad hoc? When you do meet, like,
Yep.
what's the interaction like? Do you have a checklist of things to talk about? Like,
Yeah. So we do all of that. So with us particularly, and anytime you work with an advisor, their program may look a little different. So I'll tell you just about us and what seems to work on what we found is the right cadence. So for most of our clients, we work on an every other week, a biweekly conversation that's pre-scheduled. And, you and I are going to talk, and I'll tell you there is a flow for that conversation. We're going to talk every other week. The combination of a biweekly cadence and quarterly goals and then long-term goals, that combination, long-term, quarterly, which is kind of like midterm, not so close that you have to be panicked, but close enough so that we're accomplishing something, and then biweekly works really nicely. So that we keep that cadence of biweekly calls. And then on top of that, we offer unlimited access. So as a client, you can call 5 times in a day, and that happens. We get calls all day, every day from folks. And it can be anywhere from, hey, will you help me think through pricing on this project, to a client just sent me this email, how would you respond, to, I hired a subcontractor and they're flaking out, now what? I mean, it can be anything. To, David, I'm angry all the time, right? So, and that's unlimited. And because my firm's number one value is extreme client responsiveness, we get back right away. We either pick up the phone or we get back right away and help out. So ad hoc, every other week, and the every other week does follow we have a pattern. We're always going to start with something positive. We are going to deal with any burning issues, and sometimes that takes all the time. There's something that we need to address. We'll usually look at the commitments from last time. So what did you say you were going to do? All of that conversation around your burning issues about what you were supposed to do last time, were you able to, what got in the way? If you weren't able to, we have a little mechanism for tracking that. And if you make a commitment and you don't live up to it, and you make that same commitment again and you don't live up to it, then the third time we're going to have a conversation about, is it really a commitment? What do we need to do so that you either accomplish this or let's just set it aside? All of that's going to create your commitments for the next time. So we're going to go through that. We always talk about at the end what your key learning is or takeaway. We're always going to talk about what you're excited about for the future. So we start on a positive and end on a positive, and there's some good science reasons for that. And then, was this of value? Was this helpful? That's kind of our, how we go through it. And seems to work. People stay with us for a very long time.
Now, you are kind of like the Hercules of content creation and, creating really useful frameworks. Your blog alone, super helpful, but then I know that you also have created all sorts of like libraries of email templates and conversation templates and so forth. A lot of that's not available on your website. Is that material that you kind of pull from to, support your clients? Like, here's this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So constantly you're getting tools also. If we need to work on mindset, we have a mindset shifter exercise. If you need to work on impact, we have the problemer, we have some other things. We have exercises, we have templates, we have tools, we have, all of that. And we just break it out as needed. When somebody needs something, we say, here it is. Someone asked for something the other day that we didn't have. We're like, oh, look, a gap. And so now we're creating a new asset, and that asset will be available for other clients too.
Talk to me a little bit about your work with boutique firms and how that's different, and the kind of challenges or issues that they're facing as they're kind of hit the different inflection point?
Yeah. So boutiques are, the work with them is fairly different. And we transition people from solo to boutique at a certain point. That's kind of a commitment. If we get you to a certain level, you're going to transition because the fees are substantially higher and it's much more work. A boutique firm is facing somewhat similar, but also different challenges. For a boutique firm, there's also how do we make more rain? But the tweak on that is also how do we make more rainmakers? Because at some point as a boutique, you cannot be fully supported by the owner founder or by that first generation. There's just a limit. The limit can be quite high. There's a firm in out west where the top person does about $20 million herself, that's a pretty high level of revenue for a small firm. But a typical solo, an owner might do 6-7 million before kind of really tapping out. We have to create that next generation of rainmakers. And so that's a big deal. Not just how do we create more rain, but how do we create more rainmakers? And so for them, as opposed to solos, we have a system. We have a program that we can install and training for the next generation that we do. And it's a couple of years, Will, to build that next generation. So that's one challenge. There is still a challenge around scaling. How do we scale this thing profitably? And there are all sorts of elements around that, around systemization and those pieces. There's the third challenge that boutiques have, which is, again, quite acute right now, and we only help with indirectly, is how do I find more talent? How do I keep and find and retain talent? The labor market in consulting is extraordinarily tight at the moment. And finding good talent is tough. We are not recruiters. What we will do is we will help a firm create a culture, an environment that attracts people and that makes them more likely to stay. And will help with the comp design and all of that, those sorts of pieces. So those are kind of the three big challenges on the boutique side. And then many boutiques have an aspiration, which is to sell, or how do I get out? And yesterday I was talking to the CEO of a firm we worked with. They were right at, I want to say 2 million when we started. Yes, 2 million and change. And I talked with him yesterday because he has an offer for $12 million. It's like, yes, which is great. So that aspiration of how do I get out is a boutique challenge that is one that, it needs to be on the table and discussed.
Fantastic. So David, for listeners who are now interested and want to learn more and think about potentially engaging your support, where would you point them online? Where should they reach out to?
That's a good question. So first of all, if you're interested at all, you should do it. I'm obviously biased. Biased
observer.
But yeah, obviously I have a lot of passion for this. What we do really works well. We enjoy it. I have a great team. And, the fact that our typical client, is around for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years is saying something. So I think if you have any interest, it's worth having the discussion. I would go to davidafields.com, I think just /contact. And there's a contact form. And we get back to everybody. We get a lot of inquiries and we get back to everybody and have a discussion. And I will tell folks if we're not right for them or if we are right for them and what we can do and all of that.
Fantastic. Well, David, it's always a lot of fun having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you. Thank you for asking such smart questions and making it a fun discussion.